Okay, good morning everybody, and good morning Kalle Nilvér.
Hello, good morning.
How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. I'm pumped.
I'm pumped. Where are you pumped?
I'm in Åre right now. So I was just hearing a couple of explosions from the avalanche patrol up here in the mountains. So if you hear an explosion in the background, it's from the Åre mountains.
If we hear explosions here in Stockholm, it's probably not avalanche explosions. But great to have you here, Kalle. I think we've known each other for a while. I mean, how long is it? A few years?
Something like that, yes.
Yeah, I think you were one of the first users of your platform, GoClimate Neutral, that has now been renamed GoClimate. Do you want to just take a minute to introduce yourself and who you are and how you got into this topic?
Yes. First of all, thank you for inviting me. And I have a background in the Stockholm tech scene. I've co-founded a couple of companies. Sensbit, the Sensbit group was the first one, and it was sold to a private equity company. And the next one was Booli.se, which is a real estate search engine, the second largest after Hemnet in Sweden. I was kind of living the startup life. I was a CEO of a Booli when I started reading up on climate change, and me and my girlfriend were expecting our second child. So I was reading up on climate change and starting asking myself hard questions like what's the state of the planet that we're leaving to our children, and me specifically to my children. So I kind of, after reading up and realizing, and this was before Greta and before Fridays for Future, and it felt like nobody was talking about climate change. So I kind of got depressed, actually, kind of a mix between panic and depression. And my best medicine to that is to start acting, to start doing something. So I started looking at my personal carbon footprint, and I stopped flying. I got rid of our car. I started eating vegan food and so on, but realized that this is not enough. Me doing something. We need to be loads of people doing stuff together. So that's why we founded GoClimate, where we try to help individuals and companies to do something impactful for the climate. So things that are low effort but high impact. That's kind of our motto. Mm-hmm. So now we're 8,000 individuals helping out. We're about 600 companies, many of them e-commerce companies, helping out, trying to stop climate change together.
Cool. And this is a topic that's been near and dear to myself as well. I think I discovered these issues around the same time you did. And I think I was one of the 21st users in your platform where individuals can sign up for climate offsets. I think you describe it as a voluntary tax on carbon, essentially. And I think it's not, it sort of has the effect that I was dieting a few years ago and lost 10 kilos. And when you do that, you're starting to recognize where energy is coming from the food, what the nutrition look like, and you're starting to analyzing what you're eating. And I think the process I've had with your service is sort of kicked off a process where you're starting to understanding things that sound like they are good, but then you realize it's just marginal effect, and then things you didn't think of, they can have a huge impact. And I think when you start realigning the efforts and the impact, I think it helps a lot to understand what works. A lot of things that can be counterintuitive, for instance, that plastic bags have lower climate impact than paper bags. But when you get into the details, I think you get a pretty good understanding. And you guys have done a great job in offering a service for offsets. Improove has been using your service for 3 years. I think we had invoice number 1 in your company, which I'm proud of. But I think you've expanded and your company's grown. You're helping some of the biggest names in the business. And I think you're very professional. You're very knowledgeable. It's not about greenwashing. This is actually getting things done. And this is a topic I've wanted to bring up because I think in Sweden a couple of weeks ago, there was a news headline going through the media where e-commerce is great and all in COVID, but it's destroying the world. Okay, is it? And where and why? And is it a problem? Is it worse or better than retail? And I think I wanted to do this for a year almost, and finally we're here. So let's get it done. So we have, I will hand it over to you mostly today. And please shoot off your questions in the chat because Kalle is very, very knowledgeable on the physics of climate change, but also the how you should think as an individual, how you should think as a company, and we'll get through this. So please shoot off any questions you have in the chat. Maria will collect them and we'll get through them either during the presentation or in the end. But please do that. It's a very it's important to. I think the purpose today is to help everybody understand what has impact and where we should direct our focus, because everybody has limited time and resources, and we need to use them wisely. So with that, I will try to hand over to you the hosting. There you go.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a few slides that I wanted to share. And first of all, I just wanted to, again, thank you for inviting me here. And I wanted to kick off with kind of the basics first, so we're on the same page. So basically, like, climate change is very simple. It's caused by us emitting greenhouse gases, and it's mainly from burning fossil fuels. And this is an image that's from one of the movies that we have created at GoClimate, where we try to explain climate change in a simple way. And I think this image explains the basics in a pretty good way. We take out fossil fuels from the ground and we burn it, and the carbon dioxide mainly is added to the atmosphere, and that affects the heating from the sun to stay on the planet in the atmosphere. So that's kind of like, it's that simple, basically. There's of course lots of details here, and it's not the topic of this webinar perhaps, but there's a lot of important details, as well as like different tipping points that we're getting closer to that might be irreversible. There's but we're not going to spend so much time on that here. If you have any questions on this,
I can just comment on it, because I think this drawing is very great. Because there is a great YouTube series that I watched, like 62 videos of a professor in the US explaining radiation, no heating, and like if you didn't have the greenhouse effect, it would be like minus 18 degrees on Earth. Now it's like more 14 or 15. And what's happening now, they're inching towards maybe 16 or 18. And it sounds like it's marginal, but I think because there's a lot of things happening. Some light is mirrored off by the clouds, and other things are captured by the oceans. It gets very complicated very fast. But I think there's two types of carbons. It's a cycle that's like when you grow a tree and build a chair, that's essentially carbon capture. Like you take carbon from the air, it goes into the tree, you build a house or a chair from that one, and now that stays in the house until it starts to rotten, and then it becomes goes into the air again. So I think you have natural cycles, and that's, I think that without the greenhouse effect and without carbon, we would be dead. I think it's a very, very good thing. It's just that we're overdosing a little bit. And I think we're overdosing by moving the fossils in the ground into the air. I think this is accumulating more heat. And I think nobody really knows where it's going to end up. But it's the climate's going to find a new equilibrium on a different setting. And nobody really knows where will rain happen in the future, where will food come from. And it's probably going to be a little bit messy on the road. We're probably going to survive, but it's going to be a lot of sharing more resources, and it's not a great track record of humans to share resources. I think we're all better off of containing this because it's most important. It's unknown. The Earth has never had this concentration before. I think that's why everybody's taking this very seriously. That we cannot just idly sit by and wait and hope that nothing happens.
Yeah, and if you think about the consequences and the unknown consequences, it's really, really scary, actually. But there's so many things that we don't know exactly how they're going to play out in the nearest like 50 to 100 years. So yeah, it's pretty scary. But to continue, kind of the state of climate change before we get into e-commerce a bit more specifically. These are the last 400,000 years of the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And as you can see, we're at current level. I think the current level is 417 parts per million, which is how you measure carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. There was a new record just a few weeks ago, which is not a record we celebrate, but it's a pretty scary record as well. But it's going really fast if you look at in a geological scale. And one of the images that made me realize how serious this is this image. It might look a bit complicated, but the black line here is basically the carbon dioxide emissions. And we are emitting more and more. So from 1980 and to today, where we're just emitting more and more into the atmosphere. And what made me realize how serious this is the image of it being like a glass of water. So we're emitting more and more, like we're filling up the glass of water more and more and faster, which makes it like sometime the glass is going to spill over. So the longer we wait until we turn off the tap, the faster we need to turn off the tap before the water overflows. So that's what this image tries to communicate. So if we had started at year 2000, then we would need to lower our emissions about 3% per year, which would be, kind of easy, probably. But as we waited longer and longer and increased our emissions more and more, we really face a radical transformation of our society now if we are to do something. And in this case, what this graph looks at is how we're going to stay below the 2 degree centigrade goal from the Paris Agreement. And it's only to be able to have a 66% chance of reaching that goal. And that's not like the dream scenario. The dream scenario is 1.5 degrees. So this radical transformation that we're facing is pretty big challenge, if you put it that way. As an example, 87% of our energy in the world is based on fossil fuel. So 87% is fossil fuels based, and we need to reach zero basically in a few years. And 97% of our cars in the world are fossil fuel cars. We need to reach zero pretty soon. So it's like a radical transformation that we're facing. So to get into that was kind of the basics, but to get into e-commerce a bit more, and I think this image is everybody recognizes Greta, of course, but this is the face of the employees and the customers of the future, or of today, but even more in the future. And what I want to say with this image is that people and society are waking up to the severeness of this situation. More and more people are starting to understand, including your employees and your customers. Basically, what we're going to see the next coming years is more aware customers, more aware employees. We are going to see more laws and taxes from politicians. So adapting to climate change within your business, I think it's a very smart move if you're going to be a future-proof company and have a successful business in the not too distant future. So diving really down to e-commerce and getting into the specifics is, first of all, this is kind of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and e-commerce here is, as you can see, the energy part of this graph is really big. 73% of the greenhouse gases comes from energy, and that's from transport and energy use in industry. And both transport and industry is, of course, part of, or e-commerce is part of those two parts of this graph. So, and also energy use in buildings, where warehousing, for example, is also affected by e-commerce. So then we know kind of where e-commerce comes into this. And if we want to go into the e-commerce climate footprint of e-commerce, and if we compare retail to e-commerce, this graph is pretty telling, I think, which actually says that e-commerce is part of the solution, which is, I think, very hopeful. E-commerce can be a good thing. So if you look at this graph, you can see that in retail, the biggest part of the emissions are from customer transport. So basically people going from their homes to the store and back, buying things. But in e-commerce, of course, that doesn't happen. And it's instead divided into these different categories. So if you look at the big ones here, it's last mile delivery. And this is, of course, like average numbers. So it might not affect or be affected by your, it might not represent your business. But last mile delivery is a real big part. Packaging is a big part. Warehousing is a big part. What I really like with this graph, it gives you kind of a map on what you can do. If this is representative for your business, then try to look at the last mile delivery. Can you do that in a green way? Can you do it in a fossil-free way? That's great. That's going to be, in average, do a great impact. If you can do something about packaging, that might be harder, but if you can do something there, that probably will make a big impact as well. And also warehousing. Can you switch to green energy in your warehousing? That's also like a really good thing. Then this graph will be close to zero if you tackle those things. And what this graph doesn't really show is, of course, other things that e-commerce affect.
If you stay on this one, if you go back to the previous one for a while before you, I think this is a graph I've seen over it. I think this is an American study. There are more studies as well. I think if you go to, I think the main takeaway is I had a conversation last week. Oh, it's so bad. I bought this thing on Wish, and I think I'm destroying the climate because it's being transported from Asia or China. And in fact, everybody's seen the boat in the Suez Canal. I think we got a question here. Is this the last mile, the customers or the shipping company? And I think actually the transport of the boat is not a super big impact. The last mile from the e-commerce warehouse home to you is probably the biggest impact, a bigger impact, because these large transport vessels are enormous and actually quite efficient. And I think in general, like the retail network is a very decentralized network. A store is pretty deserted many hours of the week, but where an e-commerce warehouse is very busy most days of the week. So I think that the regional or national e-commerce centers are typically more efficient than a decentralized retail network, and because you need the heating and a lot of shopping malls and stores, etc. So I think you're starting from a pretty good position, and I think also since you are either centralized or regional, you can attack these areas more efficiently. If you have trucks coming every day picking up things from your warehouse, if you can control that vendor and knowing how they are, what kind of transport energy they're using for delivery, I think that is a great thing. And I think a lot of these companies are in a very detailed way. I think at least DHL has a very transparent breakdown of the CO2 emissions on all the package on the delivery goods. And I think we got a question here. What about returns? Yeah, this is just the delivery. I think returns is adding another last mile back from your home. So I think it's and then I think in one example is we work with e-commerce companies where, for instance, you have home delivery. And home deliveries are worse than picking up at service points. So if you as a consumer, picking up at service point is better than having a home delivery, of course. But if you have a home delivery and you forgot to enter your door code, the package is then sent back to the warehouse, and then you enter the door code and it's sent again. So now it's three last mile deliveries, and it's stacking pretty fast. I think this is an issue that you really need to think about. So I think this is the happy flow as I understand it. So returns are not included here.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for clarifying that, and a very good question. And my next slide is takes up also like the bad parts that were not represented in the last graph, which is like excessive consumption and excessive returns, which of course makes e-commerce have a higher carbon footprint than retail if those things are being done more than in retail. So I guess this is kind of like the climate footprint of e-commerce in general, and the problems we're facing in e-commerce in general. And I have a few slides now where we go into more like why we should tackle this. So as I said before, many people are realizing that the climate change is a big problem. And one group is, of course, politicians and voters. So what we're facing now, what e-commerce are facing, is that we're going in the nearest like 5 to 10 years, we're going to see, I think, a lot of laws coming into place. And this is from about a month ago, where the European Parliament backs a plan to price carbon at the EU's border, which will affect the price of goods produced in, for example, in China. So this is one like effect. It will cost more to buy things from China because of this tax that hopefully from an environmental position or perspective, this hopefully will be implemented pretty soon. I'm sorry, this is in Swedish, but the headline says in English that New Zealand, this is from yesterday actually, so it's happening lots of things all over the world. But the headline says that New Zealand forces companies to report their climate impact. So there's a law in New Zealand coming into place where and they're starting off with banks and insurance companies and so on, but they are forcing companies to report climate impact, which is pretty interesting. Things are going to happen politically in the nearest years. And just to continue on the theme on why we want to do this, I mean, most of the customers contacting us, I feel, have only want to do a good thing. They want to protect the planet or make the planet a bit better place to live in the next few years for the next generation. So that's like the main motive I think most people have. But if the people contacting us have a board to report to or have a CEO they need to talk to, and there's lots of other advantages on working with climate change that I just want to short cover. So of course, like employee satisfaction, if you work with climate, if you're a climate friendly company, employee satisfaction will probably rise because people want to work in a company that does good things. We have seen this in our company. Our last position we had we had 400 people applying for that job. So 400 people, we did like hardly any advertising for the position. So it's like a big surge from people. And I think that's like the Greta generation, when they're coming to age and wants to start finding workplaces, this is going to get more and more important. Another advantage is, of course, attracting more customers. If you have if you work with climate and you do it in a serious way, then I think like attracting more customers will increase now, but also even so more in the future. Another thing that I'll show some examples on companies later that does this really well, but marketing will get help if you're a green company and you can say that you're doing really good things. That might help PR and marketing, and hopefully, or I'm of the view at least that we can combine like doing really good things for the planet and earning more money and having like a better society, or like people having living better lives, but also and companies earning more money, but also staying within the planetary boundaries. So yeah, that's kind of the advantages of working with climate change. If you weren't motivated enough, I think this is like super good things. If you start working with the climate more, it's going to be like the business is going to start going better. So diving into what should we do then? I mean, there's several, of course, different paths going forward. We usually talk to our customers and try to find like the path that is best for them. But so this will be kind of like an average way forward. I think that the first thing that's always good to start with is having a map. So if you want to go somewhere, it's good to have a map to know where you're going, and to measure your carbon footprint is like a super good first step. You can do this in a way that's like really like do an assessment, basically like a fast assessment and overview, but you can also do it like really detailed according to all the standards if you want to. Both ways are fine, I think. But acting on the right thing is really, I think, good. So you won't waste your energy, because as PM said, your energy and your time is most likely limited. So it's better to start working on the bigger things that has a big impact.
And I think that this is something you inspired us to do. And I think that at Improove, I think we essentially, we're a consulting company. We don't deliver goods. And so I think in our case, 70% of our carbon footprint is flying. We have offices in Portugal and Serbia. We try to interact and work across, and that is accumulating pretty fast. I think that is not 70%-ish. Then I think the rest part is we take the square foot of our offices in Belgrade, in Portugal and Stockholm, we multiply by the local average electricity carbon footprint, and we calculate the total cost of our heating. So that's another substantial thing. And then the last is our service centers we're using and the number of computers and phones we are buying. I think that is how we calculate. I think we calculate the number of flight hours, and we take an average of 150 kilos per flight hour per person, essentially like a rule of thumb number. And I think it took me like a day to get that in place. You need to research the electricity costs, footprint per country, etc. But most of these numbers are available. I think it was sort of getting to the point where you want to do it, then it takes a couple of days to do it. And when you understand, you have, okay, should we recycle cans in the kitchen? Sure, but also reduce flight hours is probably way more impactful. So I think this year has shown us that we can work more remotely. So I think that is what we did. I think for an e-commerce company, you need to break down these numbers, and we'll get back. I think one of the companies that done this very, very well is Asket. We both have interacted with them. They have on their website full transparency into the goods they're producing is probably the biggest impact. How can they address those, the packaging? So we'll get back to those more concrete examples later. But I think this is where it starts. I think you started off as like a climate offset service, but I think it starts with understanding what you need to offset. Because in order to answer what should I offset, you need to understand what are my emissions. And as a company, it can be a little bit tricky in the beginning, but these are services you provide. There are other companies that do this, and there's online tools. But understanding your carbon footprint is the first step.
Yeah, as an individual, it's many of the people I meet, at least, and the companies as well, like focus, at least in Sweden, on recycling, because that's what we've been brought up with, that the recycling is really important. But if you measure, like you need to recycle as a household for about 20 years to come out with the same emission reductions as saving or not flying one time for one person within Europe. So 20 years of recycling is one plane trip, basically, which also like puts it in my head, at least in perspective, that it's probably a lot more efficient and a lot more low effort to stop not flying, not fly that trip instead of recycling for 20 years. There are other, of course, really good things with recycling, and there are not has to do with the climate, but just as an example. Yeah, and the next step is, of course, reducing your emissions. When you measured it, we already started talking a little bit about this, but I mean, green transport is a great thing. Green electricity contracts, remote working and meetings instead of business trips, educating customers on making things last longer. One of our customers, CDLP, which is a Swedish fashion brand, have really done this really well in a fun way. They're hanging up underwear and letting the underwear dry in the sun on their site. So you can, like, they're encouraging their customers, and they're writing about this as well, to not use the drying machine, but rather letting the clothes dry in the sun, which makes them, it's better for the environment, also makes the clothes last a lot longer. That's like small things like that can really make a difference. And here, of course, when you have the map, you need, you know what to focus on. It can be, and this list can be probably like 100 points long, depending on your organization and your business. So after you're reduced, my experience at least is that it's so much easier if you find business synergies with that aligns with the map, the measurement, or with doing good things for the planet. If you find business synergies, the work is going to go so much simpler, is my experience. It's not going to be any problem with aligning with the board or with the company in other parts of the company. So we always like ask this question, like what initiatives can strengthen your brand? How can you make your company stronger? And of course, it's really important that you do real impact here, and that you don't, like, greenwash is a word that's very commonly used, and a lot of companies getting accused of greenwashing, even though they try to do their best, which is a bit sad, but sometimes really a good thing as well, calling like fake initiatives out. So like, be sure if you find the business synergies, you want to do things, be sure to have cleaned your own house. So measurement is always a good thing to stand on, and doing like the basic reductions is a good thing. We always recommend our customers to be humble in marketing. It's of course nice sometimes to be really bold in marketing, but in terms of it depends on where you are in your journey, but in the beginning at least, it's good to be kind of humble and transparent about your initiatives and what you've done in other parts of the organization. I think as a company, of course, depending on the size of your company, you can have a lot of influence in society as a whole. If you look at the climate crisis, I think at least that the end solution to the climate crisis is going to be a political solution somehow. It's probably going to be like a carbon tax or some kind of laws regulating the economy somehow. So the question is, how can we make that happen as fast as possible? And how can you not only maybe affect your own business, but also your suppliers, for example, or your customers? So as a business, you may or may not have a really big possibility, or what do I say, opportunity to do a big climate impact outside of your company borders, or your company walls. So ask your suppliers for their carbon footprint. Ask politicians if what they are doing. A lot of politicians want to do the right thing, but a lot of them also are really keen on listening, of course, to voters, which is their job, but also to companies. What do companies want? So if they see that even if like 1 or 10 companies are contacting them and asking them what they are doing, that can make a difference. So, and of course, this depends on how big your size of your business is, but the opportunity here and the possible climate impact can be huge and can be a lot bigger maybe than you can do within the company. And as a last step, PM, you've already talked a little bit about this. So this is a really simple thing you can do, which is offsetting your emissions. It should never be. You should never do that instead of reducing, but as a thing you do after you reduced your emissions. It's a kind of complicated area, so we're not going to deep dive into that too much. But the fact is that the world needs a huge amount of money to be able to do the transition, especially the global south needs. There's a huge need for money driving the transformation to a sustainable society. So, and that money can come from offsets, and it's also offsets as a way of taking responsibility for your emissions. So what you basically do to simplify it a bit, is that you see what kind of how much emissions you haven't been able to reduce, and then you basically help someone else reduce it instead with money. So since we have one atmosphere, this logic works, but there was also some traps here. So it's important to do this in a conscious and responsible way. It's a really, in my head, and for most of our customers, it's a really high impact and low effort thing you can do.
Can I shoot in a question before we move on to the good examples? I think we get a question here from Johan is, if logistics partner is carbon neutral by planting trees to compensate their emissions, is this sufficient to claim that you're a green transport company?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the
like
question.
if you are, let's say that you have a transport company that is electrified or using biofuels, then you can argue that they're fossil fuel free, right? But if your entire fleet isn't that, but you're doing carbon offsets, is that enough to claim that you're a green transport?
Yeah, this is actually quite a complicated area. There are some standards you can look on. There's an ISO standard, and there's also a PAS standard we can look at and use certain words. You can say that you're carbon neutral or climate neutral according to the ISO standard if you offset your emissions. But that's been kind of criticized among environmental circles mainly. So the new standards are a bit more strict. There's an initiative called Science-Based Targets that's they're right now working on a definition for net zero, for example, which is which you can't say that you're net zero according to that standard if you're only planting trees. As we looked at in the first picture with this, where the carbon cycles, the different carbon cycles, you basically can't put up, burn up fossil fuels and release it in the atmosphere where it will stay hundreds or thousands of years, and just plant trees, which will capture the emissions for 30 years maybe, or 10 years maybe. So it doesn't really, or no offset will cancel, or very few offsets will cancel the emissions you do.
I think that if I were to, because I've been thinking about this as well, I would definitely not be satisfied with that. I would go for a company, I think, is it Army? That is a carbon fossil-free transportation company in Stockholm, at least. I know there's a few entirely fossil-free transportation companies in Sweden. So I think logistics has a big role to play here. I think that is, I would definitely not be satisfied with it. I think the average carbon footprint on a PostNord package is around 0.4 kilos on average, and I think they're transparent and showing this, and they're trying to drive that number down year after year, and I think that's a good way to do it. But I think because the problem is that tree eventually rottens, and when it rottens, the carbon dioxide goes back into the air. It's like a temporary fix. It's not a long-term fix. So it probably shouldn't count.
Now, trees planting is more like postponing your emissions. So you're binding the emissions for maybe another 30 years, but then it will most likely be released. Or you can't guarantee at least that it will stay.
Unless there. You're building a chair out of the tree, because then it's being captured a bit longer.
Yeah, a bit longer, yes.
Furniture is a good way of storing carbon.
And there's, regarding the term climate neutral, the government agency in Sweden regulating like what terminology you can use for products, which is Konsumentverket. They just released last week a report where they want to regulate, maybe not a report, but yeah, they released some kind of a report like writing, where they said that they're going to regulate claims of that type, like climate neutral, more on products. So it probably won't be allowed in a year time from now in Sweden to claim that a product is climate neutral if you don't explain more on the product what that means. It's also the case for the term netto noll, which is used a lot on like milk and similar products. So I recommend all our customers not to use like climate neutral right now, because it's probably a term that's going to be more regulated, and it's kind of criticized right now with and it's, yeah, they have a case, the critics.
Should we jump into a few Because we have a few great examples. I think there's some good companies getting it right now. We can get into a couple of them, and please shoot off questions because there's a lot of things to go into. So your questions are the most important. I think now we'll get into a long list of great examples.
Yes, there's so many companies who already realize this, of course, and they're doing a great job, I think. And Houdini is one of them. They're on their site selling used products, which is really great, going into a circular economy. And they offer products for rent. So if you're going skiing for 1 week, you don't need to buy new clothes. You can rent them instead from Houdini store. And they're also repairing products. As I said earlier, they're making this a part of their brand. So many people, when they think about Houdini, they think about sustainability. So I think this is a great example on what you can do in the terms of a more like circular economy.
And I think this is underscoring that the biggest emissions are coming from the product itself. It's not the transportation or the package is the biggest thing. You have way more emissions from the product itself, the manufacturing, the milling, the raw material, etc. And I think in general, I think Blocket and Facebook marketplace gets too little credit. I think nobody's getting rich of those because they're sort of playing in the background, but those have a great impact. Tradera, and I think we'll get into a few of them, but I think Houdini here are recognizing that the biggest emissions are coming from the product, not necessarily the shipping.
Yeah, exactly. That's absolutely correct observation. And Houdini is doing a lot more than just these three examples. So they're of course also looking at transports and.
But I think reducing excessive consumption has a great impact. And if you can make that your brand, and if consumers in general are buying less new products, but they're buying yours and servicing them, using them longer, and buying used product, you're sort of injecting yourself into the circular economy. And I think that can be great for the singular brand, even if the overall consumption would go down. Yeah,
it's a very good point. We've already talked about Asket, which I think we both know them, but they're really good. So we might be biased, but they're really thorough in their environmental work. And one of their taglines is "The world doesn't need another fashion brand." Or the pursuit of less, which means basically that they want customers to buy less. For example, on Black Friday, they closed their store. I think that was a couple of years ago, because they don't want to encourage unnecessary consumption. Of course, this is like part of their brand, and they try to do fashion that it's not like season fashion, but more like timeless fashion that they think is gonna be fashionable for a long time. So actually I have a shirt on here that's a Asket shirt, so I'm a big fan. But and they also are spending a lot of time on making the clothes durable, so they will last for a long time. So basically the opposite of fast fashion. They also have a full transparency on their page, which is really inspiring. I encourage you all to go in and click around because it's really inspiring to see what you can do if you have the data. They've done really ambitious LCAs or life cycle impact assessments on all their products, which is also very impressive. This is of course part of their brand as well, which makes people and customers and employees like them.
Do you mind if yeah, okay, please. Yeah, that was what I was asking for. I think because the full transparent part is unique to their DNA. I think this is very, very great.
Yeah, this is super, and there are also graphs if you click if you click further. But yeah, this is their transparency on their product page, so you can see exactly how big impact one product has. This is a T-shirt that has 1.9 kilos of carbon dioxide as a footprint.
And as part of that one, because we had a question about what is contributing to what, I think I have the detail graph in front of me here. It says that out of the 1.9 kilos, probably like less than 0.1, like 5% is due to transportation. I think 95% is in the product itself. It's not shipping from Asia to Sweden. That of course would be cool if we could ship it from Norway or from Sweden, but that is a pretty small environmental impact. And then, I have another graph in front of me that the average emission from a PostNord package is 0.4 kilos. So the delivering the PostNord package has 8 times the impact compared to shipping it from Asia. It sounds counterintuitive, but when you see the Suez Canal boats that get stuck, you it clicks a little bit, and I think that is good to have. We have a related question that I think we can just cut in, so we have time for question. Margrethe asks, what is the ideas for reducing the impact from returns? And this is a question I asked to Björn at H&M. He was I think he was part of booting up the Other Stories brand with H&M, and asked him, hey Björn, because I was next to him on a flight for 2 hours, so I think I'm going to pick your brain on everything. So I said, okay, returns, how do you fix returns? And he told me it's impossible, you can't do that. But there must be a cool startup or something. No, there's not. We tried 11 startups, none work. But 2 things work. One, you can print the size of the model on the pictures, like if it's 173 centimeters or 185 or whatever, that can help customers understand the fit. So they have some marginal effect, but it works. The biggest effect, you know what it was, Kalle? The single most impact. You can create pants in stretch material. That has a substantial impact on returns. But it's a little bit discouraging. So I think the returns, I see companies, I think the problem is Zalando has, I think, an average return rate of like 65% or something. So it's built into their identity to, I think their analogy is you pick 4 garments when you try it on in the store and you buy 1. Same thing online. Buy 4, try 4 of them, return 3 of them. I think that's the business model they've created, because Amazon and Zalando has won the cost of transactions. So it's very cheap to deliver packages. So to make people comfortable buying, they have incentivized consumers to do a lot of returns. I think this is a problem. This is a problem Zalando has to address, and I haven't seen them doing it. I think the way they are doing it, I think if you look at Amazon, they have something called Amazon Wardrobe. I think this is applied for marketplaces like Boost could do this, I guess, where they have like put anything in a box, because if you're going to do a lot of returns anyway, you know what? Put 5 items in there, select 1 or 2 or 3, and at least buy something, and then you return the box. So then they're sort of accepting that every order will have a return, and then they're building it, but it's on average, it's getting fewer. So I think returns are hard, because I see fashion companies struggling with up to 50% returns. I think 20% is a very good number. So then you need to add 20% last mile emissions. It's very much. And then I know if you're selling, like if you're an online pharmacy or you're selling like sports goods, the return rate is maybe less than 2-3%. So then it's essentially non-existing. But fashion, I think, is still, it's one of the bigger part of the climate impact, I think, in fashion, to reduce it. And I think I think it hasn't been resolved, I think is the honest answer. And I think it's still something that needs to be resolved. The stretch material is one way to address it. I think creating the wardrobe box where you're buying and always returning something, but maybe then the average return rate is going down because you have one return of many goods. But I don't, to be honest, don't know a very good solution to it. I think if you have a retail network, you can probably leverage return in store. That is probably a good. I've spoken to companies about this. That if you can leverage return in store, that's a way to reduce to have the purchase become a return become another purchase if you can exchange for different size. But I think this is something I encourage all of you to go research, talk around the business, see what you can do, because I don't know the solution to it. H&M didn't.
No, I agree. It's really hard. I mean, turning your transports into electric transports is at least lowering the import.
Yeah, that's true. That's probably the best short-term fix because logistics are embarrassingly low with innovation in general, and in this area, I think they feel the pressure and put the pressure on the logistics companies to listen. We need fossil-free. If you can't do electric, do biofuels, but that's maybe the easiest fix to it right now. Can we, before we go on, there's another question. What tools do you recommend using when doing climate impact calculations?
And there's lots of tools out there depending on type of your business. We have a tool on the GoClimate site, which is free if you're a service company. So if you don't have any own factories or not producing anything, it's kind of a simple calculation, so you can use for free. There are other tools out there. They might work and might help if you're producing things as well. I haven't tried them out myself, so I'm not sure if I can recommend any specific one. What most people do is hiring consultants. We can help with this, but there are other companies as well who can help with doing the calculations for you. And as PM said, you can also do it yourself for if you have, you said it took you a day. So it takes some time, but you can do it yourself as well.
We got another question here about, do we know if the cost of returns affect or not? I think there are different regulations regarding returns. I think I think you're allowed to deduct the shipping return shipping cost from the selling price when you're doing a return. That's what you're allowed to do, and I think that a lot of companies are struggling to, from a sort of branding position, do that because the customers expect free returns. But maybe you can turn that into an advantage. If you're allowed to deduct that one, do that and say that in order to reduce returns, we're going to deduct the shipping cost from that, because then we both have skin in the game. I think the free returns is of course encouraging it. So maybe use that feature to make that a feature and not a bug. Is something I haven't seen it used for that reason, but that could definitely work. People are because then again, if the goods are not returned and it's hanging in the closet, then it needs to go into the circular economy. As I think it's encouraged people to do that. I think we will need. I think the fashion industry has a lot to figure out, and it's going to take a while. And I think it needs experimentation. I don't think we should feel too bad if we're failing on the first attempt. So I think it requires tinkering, a lot of tinkering here to see what works.
So I see the time really flies here. I'm going to go through the next examples really fast. If you're interested more in the examples, I encourage you to look in the sites yourselves. So Apotea is doing really cool things with putting solar panels on their roof, which I think is the biggest roof installation of solar panels in Sweden. They're doing a lot with their packaging, and they also have the opportunity to give away money or the spare change to charity, and also like trying to make this part of their brand. Another example is the student like university bookstore, Campus Bokhandeln, which really have come a long way in their like circular economy thinking. So they buy back used books and sell them again, which is really cool and smart. They have an award for the most like climate smart student in Sweden. So every year they have this award, this climate award. They're also offsetting twice their footprint to be or have a climate positive impact, and also making this part of their brand. And just as you already mentioned this, PM, but so why should you leave the value of your brand to sites like Tradera and eBay and so on? So this is a search for Filippa K on Tradera. So you can actually, or one thought at least is that there's a lot of value in your brand. And there's probably a lot of value to capture. So if you can, instead of people laying it out on Tradera or eBay, you can let them put it up or sell it back to you. That's one idea to capitalize more on the value of your brand, and also doing the planet a really good service. Another example of this brilliant example, of course, is Patagonia, which is doing this really well on their Worn Wear site. So I'm speeding up here a bit because time is flying, but H&M is a really interesting company because they're a fast fashion company and they're really like one of the worst emitters in this area, but they're also doing, what I can tell at least, a really serious and ambitious work here. So I recommend going in there, and there's tons of information on their site on what they're doing. They're actually aiming for going to become climate positive and fully circular, which is kind of astonishing claim, I think. It's like a fast fashion chain going fully circular. So they're at least aiming. I'm carefully skeptical that they'll succeed in the next few years, but in the long term, then if that's where they're aiming, that would be really, really impressive if they succeed. They also have a very like transparent plan on how they are achieving this climate positive goal, which I won't dive into it here, but it's including offsets and carbon removals to remove their carbon footprint. Another example is fin.no, and there's lots of travel sites doing similar things. And here you can sort the results and basically giving the customer the option to buy the least or the product with the least climate with the lowest climate footprint. So here you can sort the search results on their site with the least carbon intense flight. And another example is for example, a site like Nordkvist, where you can climate offset. They let their customer offset the product within their e-commerce site. So if you look down there, you can climate offset your coffee in this case. There are also lots of, like here's a Shopify app where you can install and do the same thing. There's lots of other companies doing this as well. Basically just really simple, letting the customer add an offset to their shopping cart. I think I'll skip this actually. Google is really doing really good things that are applicable to e-commerce as well. So maybe if I go into one detail, what they're doing really good is they're doing what they do best, building software, and they're building software for cities in this case, and helping cities lower their carbon footprint. There was also lots of suppliers. This is Repack, which helps with packaging, making packaging circular. This is Move by Bike. If you want to do the last mile transport green, I recommend looking at them. I think Budbee is really doing a good job here as well. So thank you. That was it.
Great, Kalle.
I speed it up a bit. Sorry yeah, this is our team. If you want to ask us a question, we always have like 1 hour free consulting. So if you want 1 hour talking about us, about your business, feel free to contact me afterwards.
Cool. I also got a comment here in the chat that's saying that Nordkvist is a case where they're actually stating, and this is embarrassing because it's a client of ours, but they are writing, when shopping online, please be conscious of your consumption. Processing returns as an environmental impact, and Nordkvist considers free returns to be an unsustainable cost. Hence, a fee when returning pieces will be added. So they are adding a return fee for their goods. And I think it's sort of hidden in the terms and conditions, but I think it should be maybe stated more boldly that this is important. So I think that's a great idea. It says that Houdini previously took charge for returns, but now it's free returns. Can you pull some strings and make things happen? Do you know anything about that? If that's just anything they're working on?
I'm not. I don't know. Sorry.
Okay. No, but I think, and I think it's important here too. I mean, it's a big challenge. It's important. I mean, eventually you need to multiply by 0. If we're reducing by 5%, last year I think emissions were reduced by 6%. That will not make a dent anywhere. It will be invisible. If we drop it by 20%, it will have not be visible in the temperature increase. So we need to talk about more than 50%. You probably need to get down at least 80%, and at the same time do some kind of carbon capture technology. So I think it's a big effort. It's important not to shame people that are not doing it right, but sort of try to be progressive, find solutions, and tinker, because I think nobody has a a silver bullet anywhere. But I think right now the energy component is a big factor. Getting the supply chain and the transportation into a non-fossil supply chain and non-fossil delivery that will have the biggest impact. So I think maybe that's a great place to start.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kalle, for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, everyone, for listening in.
Anytime. I think we will wrap it up here, and then we will put this recording online for people to view later. Thanks, everybody.
If you want to come in contact with me, it's kalle@goclimate.com, and just go to our site and find my contact information there.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.